The dusty road stretched through the alien marketplace, filled with noise, smells, and strange colors. Humans were rare here, so when a tall man in worn clothes walked among the stalls, every eye turned toward him. Some aliens whispered, others pointed, a few even spat in disgust, but the man ignored them. He was only looking for food and a place to rest, nothing more. As he passed a stall of bright fruits, he felt a small hand grab his sleeve. Startled, he turned and saw a little alien girl staring up at him. Her eyes were large and glowing with an unusual shade of violet, her small face framed by thin tendrils of hair that shimmered like silver threads. Her clothes were old and patched, her tiny hands trembling as she held on to him. The man frowned softly, thinking she wanted coins or food. But instead, she took a deep breath and whispered words that froze his steps. "You're perfect for my mom, human. If you're single, would you marry her?" For a moment, the marketplace fell silent. The fruit seller stopped stacking his goods, 2 guards turned their heads, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. The human blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Surely this was some kind of joke, some trick. But the child's face was deadly serious, her violet eyes wet with unshed tears. The man knelt down slowly so he could meet her gaze. "Little one," he said carefully, "do you even know what you're asking me?" The girl nodded quickly, her tiny chin trembling. "My mom is alone, and they laugh at her. They say she is worthless because no one wants her. But you are different. I can see it. Please, will you marry her?" The human felt his heart twist. He looked around, and sure enough, people were staring, some with mocking smiles, others whispering cruelly. He realized this child had spoken boldly in public, without fear of shame. But why him? Why a stranger? "I don't even know your mother," he tried to reason, keeping his voice gentle. The girl's eyes widened as if he had just rejected her, and she tightened her grip on his sleeve. "You don't need to know, I can see it. You are kind. You stopped when no one else did. You listened, please don't leave us." The human sighed, torn between confusion and pity. His stomach ached with hunger, his feet were sore from travel, and all he wanted was rest. Yet here he was, trapped by the desperate hope of a child. And for reasons he could not understand, he did not want to break that hope. The fruit seller chuckled behind his stall. "Careful, human, if you take her words, you'll end up with more than you can handle." Others laughed, pointing at the girl, calling her foolish. But she stood tall as her little frame allowed, and shouted back, "My mom is not foolish. She is brave. She deserves happiness." Her voice cracked, but her spirit did not. The crowd muttered, some shaking their heads, others sneering. The human knew then that this was no prank. This was the raw plea of a child who had nothing left but hope. Kneeling lower, he gently placed his rough hand over hers. "What is your name?" he asked softly. The girl blinked, surprised, and whispered, "Lyra." "All right, Lyra," he said, "show me your mother. Let me meet her first." Her face lit up as though a star had burst inside her chest. She tugged his sleeve eagerly, pulling him away from the crowd. The human followed, his mind racing. He could have walked away, pretended not to hear, but something inside him refused to let her down. The streets narrowed as she led him through winding alleys. The air smelled of smoke and damp stone, and the further they walked, the quieter it became. No more mocking voices, no curious stares, only silence broken by Lyra's small footsteps. At last, they reached a small, crumbling house at the edge of the village. Its roof sagged, its walls cracked, yet flowers grew stubbornly in a broken pot by the door. Lyra stopped and looked up at him. "She is inside," she whispered, her voice trembling now that the moment had come. The human placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling how frail she was. He could sense the weight she carried, too heavy for someone so young. Before he could speak, the door creaked open. There stood a woman, tall but weary, her beauty dimmed by exhaustion yet shining through her tired eyes. Her hair, the same silver as her daughter's, fell loosely around her shoulders. She looked at the human in shock, then at her daughter holding his hand. "Lyra," the mother whispered, her voice full of both love and warning, What have you done now? The girl's chin lifted proudly, even as her voice shook. Mom, I found him. He's the one. He's perfect for you. The human swallowed hard, caught between the fierce pride of a child and the stunned silence of a mother. He had no answer yet, only the knowledge that his life had just taken a turn he never expected. And in the fading light of that evening, with villagers' laughter still echoing in the distance, he realized something. This was not just chance. This was the beginning of something far larger than himself. The mother stood frozen at the doorway, her silver eyes wide as she looked at the tall human her daughter had dragged home. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the edge of the broken door, her lips parting to speak but no words coming out. Lyra held tighter to the man's sleeve and pulled him forward as if presenting a precious treasure. See, Mom, she whispered, her small voice breaking the silence. I told you someone would care. I told you I'd find him. The woman's cheeks burned with shame. She knew the neighbors would already be whispering, mocking her child's desperation. She wanted to scold Lyra, to tell her this was foolish. But when she looked into her daughter's shining violet eyes, her heart softened. Still, she forced her voice to be steady. Lyra, this is not the way. We do not ask strangers to. Her words faltered when the human gave her a calm nod. I'm not here to mock you, the man said gently, his voice low. She asked me to meet you, so here I am. The mother blinked, confused and wary. She had lived with whispers for years, ever since her husband died in the war and left her alone with a child. No one in the village wanted a widow. No one wanted a woman who had already failed once. They said she was cursed, unfit, and she bore the shame in silence. But here was a stranger, worse, a human, standing in her doorway without scorn in his eyes. Lyra tugged at her mother's hand and pulled her inside. The man ducked his head slightly and entered the small, dim house. The walls were cracked, the air smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, and the floor was patched with old woven rugs. It was poor, but clean. The woman had done her best to keep a home despite having so little. Sit, please, she said finally, though her voice was stiff with discomfort. The man lowered himself onto a wooden stool that creaked under his weight. Lyra rushed to bring him water in a clay cup, her hands trembling with excitement. The mother sighed, rubbing her forehead, torn between anger and gratitude. I'm sorry, she said softly at last. My daughter speaks without thinking. She should not burden you with. She didn't burden me, the man interrupted, surprising her. She only spoke what her heart wanted. The woman's breath caught. For years, she had heard nothing but cruel words, harsh laughter, cold dismissals. To hear kindness now felt dangerous, almost painful. Her eyes filled with tears she quickly tried to hide. The man saw but said nothing. Instead, he looked at Lyra, who was smiling proudly. You love your mother very much, don't you? He asked. The girl nodded fiercely. Yes. She is the best. She works all day. She sings to me at night. But she is always sad. They all laugh at her. But I know she deserves happiness. That's why I asked you. The mother closed her eyes, her heart aching. She wanted to hush her daughter, but the words had already been spoken. The human gave a small smile, though his eyes were serious. Your daughter is brave, he said quietly, braver than most grown men I've met. Silence filled the little house, heavy but not hostile. The woman's hands tightened in her lap, her thoughts a storm. She had never asked for help, never begged for company, never dared to dream of love again. But her daughter had done what she could not. Reached out, pulled a stranger into their world, and demanded he see them. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling but steady enough. My name is Solara, she said, bowing her head slightly. I don't know why my daughter chose you, human, but you have my apology. You don't need to apologize, the man replied. I am not offended, only surprised. Lyra beamed and clapped her hands. See, Mom. He's not angry. He's different from the others. Solara gave her daughter a sharp look, but there was no real strength behind it. She felt her defenses crumbling, one brick at a time. The man leaned forward, his rough hands resting on his knees. I travel often, he explained. I don't stay in one place long. But I can tell your daughter is desperate. I can see the pain in her eyes. That's why I didn't walk away. Solara lowered her gaze. Her heart pounded with a mixture of shame and warmth. How long had it been since anyone looked at her with compassion? How long since anyone saw her as more than a broken widow? The flickering lamp lit the shadows on her face. The silence stretched, until at last she whispered, "I do not expect anything, human, I have learned not to. But, thank you for listening, it means more than you think." The man nodded, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was no promise, no declaration, only recognition. A lonely mother and a weary traveler, both carrying burdens they had never shared with others. Lyra looked between them, her little face glowing with hope. That night, when the man rose to leave, Solara did not stop him. But Lyra clung to his hand and whispered, "Please come back tomorrow." He hesitated, then gave a single nod. As he stepped into the cool night air, he realized something strange. For the first time in many years, he wanted to return. Inside the small house, Solara sat by the dying lamp, holding her daughter close. Her heart still guarded, but trembling with a feeling she had thought long dead. Hope, fragile and dangerous, had found its way back into her chest. And outside, under the pale alien moon, the human walked slowly, uncertain of what tomorrow would bring, but certain of one thing. This was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The next morning, the village was alive with whispers. Solara could feel the stairs as soon as she stepped out to fetch water. Mothers pulled their children closer, merchants exchanged smirks, and old men shook their heads in disapproval. The story of Lyra's bold plea had spread like fire, and everyone was talking about the human who had stepped into Solara's home. "They say she begged him to marry her," one woman whispered loudly enough for Solara to hear. "Pathetic," another replied, "a widow dragging strangers into her shame." Solara clenched her jaw and walked faster, her water jug heavy on her shoulder. She wanted to shout back, but her voice was trapped behind years of silence. Her only thought was to finish quickly and return to her daughter before the cruel words reached her ears. But Lyra had already heard them. When Solara returned, she found her daughter sitting by the door, fists clenched and eyes red from crying. "They laughed at you, Mom," she whispered. "They said you are worthless. They don't know anything. They don't see how strong you are." Solara knelt down and pulled her daughter close, stroking her silver hair. "Don't listen to them, Lyra. Their words are poison, not truth," she said softly, though inside her heart broke again. Later that day, the human returned, just as he had promised. The villagers watched as he walked through the market, his tall frame standing out like a torch in darkness. Children whispered in awe, men muttered about trouble, and women shook their heads. Why would a human waste his time with her? Someone sneered. The man ignored them, his eyes only on the small house at the edge of the road. When he entered, Lyra lit up with joy, throwing her arms around him. "You came back," she cried, her voice trembling with relief. Solara stood quietly, torn between gratitude and fear. "You should not have returned," she murmured. "They will not let this go. The more you come here, the more they will hate us." The man sat down calmly, his gaze steady. "Let them talk," he said. "I've faced worse than whispers." Solara shook her head, her voice low and urgent. "You don't understand, human. The council already dislikes me. They will say I am breaking tradition. They will say I am unclean." Her voice trembled as she spoke, but there was steel hidden beneath. She had lived long enough with cruelty to know how far it could go. That evening, the warning came. 2 members of the village council arrived at Solara's door, dressed in dark robes, their expressions sharp with judgment. One of them, a tall alien with narrow eyes, sneered at the human before turning to Solara. "Your daughter has shamed you before all, and now you disgrace us further by bringing an outsider into your home," he spat. "This human must leave. You will cut ties at once, or we will take measures." Solara lowered her gaze, her hands trembling as she clutched her daughter's shoulder. But before she could speak, the human rose, his shadow filling the small room. "I am not here to harm anyone," he said firmly. "I only came because your child asked me to listen. Is that a crime?" The counselor's lips curled in disdain. "You do not belong here, Deathwelder. You do not understand our ways. A widow seeking comfort from a human is an insult to our people." The other counselor nodded sharply. "We will not tolerate it. If you value your life, leave now." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Lyra's quiet sob. She clung to her mother's skirt, glaring at the counselors with all the courage her little body could muster. "You can't take him away," she cried. "He's kind. He listens. He makes her smile again." Her voice shook, but her words pierced the air like a blade. The counselors turned with disgust and stormed out, leaving a trail of whispers and threats behind them. Solara sank onto the stool, her head in her hands. "I warned you," she whispered bitterly. "They will not forgive this." The human knelt before her, his voice steady. "Then let them hate me. Not you. I can bear it. I've lived with worse." Solara lifted her eyes, startled by the strength in his words. For a moment, she saw not just a traveler, but a protector, someone who could stand where she could not. That night, villagers gathered outside, muttering, watching, judging. But inside the little house, the three of them sat together, mother, child, and stranger. The walls were thin, but for the first time in years, Solara felt a strange sense of safety. It was fragile, like glass, but it was real. As the human prepared to leave again, Lyra tugged at his hand. "Don't go," she whispered, her voice small but fierce. He looked into her eyes, then at Solara, who stood silently by the doorway. At last, he gave a single nod. "I'll stay nearby," he said. "I won't let them hurt you." The villagers might laugh, the council might threaten, but something unspoken had already begun to grow between them. Not love yet, not trust yet, but a bond, fragile and defiant, standing against a world that wanted to crush it. And as the alien moon rose high, casting silver light across the broken roof, Solara realized something she had long forgotten. She was not entirely alone anymore. The following days passed under heavy eyes. Everywhere the human walked, whispers followed him. Some laughed openly, others spat at his feet, yet he never flinched. He kept returning to the small house at the edge of the village, where Lyra's laughter and Solara's wary silence waited for him. At first, Solara tried to keep her distance. She spoke only when necessary, keeping her voice cool and guarded. But each day he returned, helping with small chores without being asked. He carried water from the well, chopped firewood, and fixed the broken latch on the door. When Solara protested, he only smiled faintly and said, "It's nothing." Lyra adored him. She followed him everywhere, tugging at his hand, asking endless questions about humans. "Do all humans have eyes like yours?" she asked one afternoon, her violet gaze wide. "Not all," he replied gently. "Each of us is different, just like you." She grinned, clearly pleased, and skipped away to collect wildflowers. Solara watched this from the doorway, her heart uneasy. The human was dangerous, not because he raised a hand, but because he was kind. Kindness was a rare thing in her world, and she feared what it might awaken inside her. Yet she could not deny the small spark of warmth that grew each time she saw her daughter smile at him. One evening, a storm swept across the village. Rain hammered the cracked roof, and the wind howled like a beast. Solara struggled to keep the fire alive, her hands trembling as the smoke filled the room. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the human entered, soaked from head to toe, carrying a bundle of wood. Without a word, he dropped it by the hearth, feeding the flames until they roared back to life. Solara stared at him, speechless. "You'll catch your death out there," she murmured. He only shrugged, water dripping from his clothes. "I've been through worse storms," he said, then added more softly, "I couldn't let you freeze." Something shifted then, subtle but real. Solara looked away quickly, her cheeks burning. She busied herself with drying Lyra's hair, but her thoughts were no longer steady. A man had entered her home not as a stranger, but as someone who cared. That night, after Lyra had fallen asleep, Solara sat across from him by the fire. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of flames. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "They will make your life harder, just because of me." The human leaned back, his eyes calm but steady. "My life has never been easy," he replied. "I don't fear their words." Solara's hands tightened on her lap. "You don't understand, human. In this village, I am already less than nothing. With you here, they will hate me more." He studied her face, the pain hidden behind her silver eyes. "You are not nothing," he said firmly. "Your daughter sees it, and so do I." Her breath caught, and she turned away. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She felt her defenses falter, brick by brick, until all that was left was silence and the warmth of his words. The next morning, she found him outside, helping Lyra patch a broken fence. The little girl giggled as he showed her how to tie the wooden slats together, his large hands guiding her small ones. Solara's heart twisted at the sight, both fear and longing battling inside her. This was dangerous, she told herself, too dangerous, yet she could not look away. As days turned to weeks, the bond grew. He was not a guest anymore. He was part of their daily rhythm. When Lyra laughed, he laughed with her. When Solara worked, he worked beside her. Even the silence between them began to feel less like distance and more like understanding. But the village did not forget. One afternoon, as Solara walked through the market, a group of women blocked her path. "You think a human will save you?" one sneered. "He'll leave you just like your mate did, and then what will you be?" Another laughed cruelly. "Maybe he'll take your daughter instead. She is prettier than you, after all." Solara's hands shook, but before she could reply, the human appeared. His voice was calm but sharp as steel. "Say another word against them, and you'll regret it." The women fell silent under his glare, retreating with mutters. Solara stood frozen, her heart racing. When he turned to her, his expression softened. "You don't need to fight them alone anymore," he said gently. That night, Solara could not sleep. She sat by the fire, staring at the shadows dancing on the walls. Her daughter's words echoed in her mind, her laughter with the human replaying again and again. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder. What if happiness was not lost to her after all? When dawn broke, she found him outside, sharpening a blade. Lyra sat beside him, humming softly. Solara watched them quietly, her heart trembling with a dangerous thought. This man was no longer just a stranger. He was part of them now. A bond had been formed, fragile yet unbreakable. The first bond, Solara realized, was not marriage, not promise, not even love yet. It was trust. And once trust took root, it was harder than stone. The nights in the village grew uneasy. Whispers became sharper, eyes turned colder, and the tension pressed heavy on Solara's small home. Still, the humans stayed close, refusing to leave them unprotected. Lyra clung to his side more often now, her little hands gripping his as though she feared he would vanish if she let go. One evening, the sky darkened with a strange stillness. The wind carried the scent of smoke, but it was not from the hearths of the village. Solara's heart sank as she recognized it. Raiders. They had come before, striking when the villagers were unprepared, taking food, goods, and sometimes even people. The council always promised safety, but when danger came, they hid behind their walls. That night, the raiders descended, their shadows moving like wolves in the dark. Shouts filled the air, flames rose from the marketplace, and terrified cries echoed through the streets. Solara clutched Lyra to her chest, her hands trembling. She knew what would happen. Widows and children were the first targets, easy prey for men without honor. The door crashed open, and the human stormed inside, his eyes sharp and urgent. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice low but commanding. Solara's heart raced as she saw the blade in his hand. "You'll be killed," she whispered, fear choking her voice. But he only shook his head. "I've fought worse than this," he said. "I won't let them touch you." The first raider kicked through the doorway, his sneer wide as he spotted Solara. But before he could take a step, the human lunged, steel flashing in the firelight. The clash was brutal, swift, and merciless. Blood sprayed across the floor as the raider fell, his weapon clattering uselessly. More followed, their laughter twisted into growls as they realized the human was no easy prey. The fight spilled into the street, where flames lit the chaos. Villagers cowered in their homes, peeking through cracks in the walls as the lone human battled against a swarm. Solara held Lyra close, tears burning her eyes as she watched. Every strike he delivered was a promise. Every wound he took was for them. He moved like a storm, each blow fueled by something more than survival. The raiders snarled, but one by one they fell beneath his strength. Yet his body was not unscathed. Blood ran down his arm, his lips split open, his breath heavy with exhaustion. Still, he stood tall, defiant, unyielding. At last, the surviving raiders broke, dragging their wounded and fleeing into the night. The street was left in silence, broken only by the crackle of fire. The villagers emerged slowly, their faces pale with shock. They had expected to see Solara dragged away, her child crying in chains. Instead, they saw a human standing, blooded but unbroken, a fallen raider at his feet. Solara rushed to him, her hands trembling as she touched his arm. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice breaking. He gave a faint smile, though his eyes were weary. "I've been hurt before," he murmured. "What matters is, you're safe." Her breath caught, and for the first time in years, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She pressed her forehead against his chest, sobbing softly. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk your life for us?" He lowered his head, his rough hand brushing gently through her silver hair. "Because you matter," he said simply, "both of you." The words sank deep, piercing through the walls she had built around her heart. For so long she had believed herself forgotten, unworthy, unwanted. But here was a man, a human, who bled for her, who stood when everyone else turned away. The villagers whispered among themselves, their mocking eyes now wide with something else. Respect. They had seen with their own eyes what Solara could not deny. The human had defended them all when the council hid in fear. He had done what no one else dared to do. That night, as the fires were put out and the village quieted, Solara sat by his side, tending to his wounds. Her hands were gentle, her heart unsteady. Each cut she cleaned was another reminder of what he had endured for her sake. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I don't understand you, human. You could have left, you could have saved yourself." His eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. "I made a choice," he replied softly, "and I'd make it again." Lyra crawled into his lap, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "You're our hero," she whispered, her little voice full of fierce pride. He smiled faintly, resting a hand on her head. "No," he said, "I'm just someone who couldn't walk away." Solara's heart swelled with emotions she had buried for years. Fear, gratitude, and something else, something dangerous but undeniable. Hope. That night, as the storm of fire faded, Solara realized her life had changed forever. The man who had entered her home as a stranger now stood as their protector. And though the world was still against them, the bond between them had been sealed in fire and blood. The first bond had been trust. But now, it was something stronger. The bond of survival, of sacrifice, of a heart willing to risk everything. And Solara knew, with a shiver that was not fear but awakening, that she could never see him as just a stranger again. The morning after the raid was quiet. Ash still clung to the air, the smell of smoke heavy over the village. The marketplace was half burned, but the people spoke of only one thing, the human who had stood alone against the raiders. Some praised him in hushed voices, others muttered with resentment, but no one could deny what they had seen. Inside Solara's home, the fire burned low, casting a soft glow over the small room. The human sat on the stool, his arm bandaged where Solara had cleaned his wound. Lyra hovered near him, proud as though he were a great warrior from the stories. Solara moved quietly, but her eyes kept stealing glances at him, her heart beating too fast. For days she had tried to hold her feelings back. She told herself it was foolish, dangerous, and impossible. But every time she saw him smile at Lyra, Every time she remembered his words, "Because you matter," her defenses weakened. She had lived years in silence, but now her heart refused to remain still. The villagers came in small groups to look at him, some with gratitude, some with suspicion. An old man bowed slightly, whispering, "Thank you, human," before slipping away. But others sneered, their voices sharp. "He will bring more trouble," one muttered. "She tempts fate by keeping him close." Solara heard it all, her hands tightening until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream at them, but fear still chained her tongue. That night, after the last visitor left and Lyra had fallen asleep, silence filled the little house. Solara sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her silver hair falling loosely around her tired face. For a long time, neither spoke. The crackle of the fire and the rhythm of the rain outside were the only sounds. At last, Solara broke the silence, her voice soft and trembling. "You should leave," she whispered, though her heart screamed the opposite. "You've already risked too much for us. They will not forgive you. If you stay, you'll suffer for it." The human's eyes lifted, steady and calm. "I've suffered before," he said quietly, "but leaving you, that would hurt worse." Her breath caught, her chest tightening. She looked away, but her voice spilled before she could stop it. "I don't understand you, human. Why do you stay? Why do you fight for us when no one else would?" He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. "Because I see you," he said softly, "not the shame they whisper about, not the curse they call you, I see you." Her eyes burned with tears, and she tried to turn her face, but one tear slid down her cheek. She pressed her hands against her lap, her voice breaking. "I stopped believing I could be seen, after my mate died. They told me I was nothing, they laughed, they turned away. I lived only for Lyra. She is my light, my reason, but I never thought anyone would look at me again." His hand reached across the small table, resting gently over hers. "You are not nothing, Solara," he said, her name heavy with meaning. "You are stronger than you know, and your daughter is proof of that strength." Her lips trembled, her silver eyes glistening as she met his gaze. For the first time in years, she let herself speak the truth buried deep inside her. "I never believed I could love again," she whispered, "until you." The words hung in the air like fire, fragile yet unshakable. Her heart pounded in terror at what she had admitted, but the silence that followed was not cruel. The human's eyes softened, his hand tightening gently over hers. "I've carried many burdens in my life," he said quietly, "but tonight, I realize something. I don't want to carry them alone anymore." Her tears fell freely now, her shoulders trembling. She wanted to pull away, to protect herself, but her heart would not allow it. She had confessed, and now there was no taking it back. The human leaned closer, his voice steady but full of something she had longed to hear. "I feel the same, Solara. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know this, I want to stay." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she could not move. Then, slowly, she let her fingers curl around his hand. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time she had chosen to hold someone since her mate's death. Lyra stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, as though sensing the bond forming in the quiet room. Solara looked at her daughter, then back at the human. Hope, fragile but bright, filled her chest. Perhaps this was not madness. Perhaps this was not shame. Perhaps this was the beginning of a family. That night, the fire burned low, and the rain softened outside. But inside the little house, hearts that had been silent for too long finally spoke. It was not a promise of forever yet, but it was the confession of truth. And once spoken, truth could not be buried again. The days after Solara's confession felt different. The little house no longer carried only silence and sorrow. Now, there was laughter, soft conversation, and moments that felt almost like peace. The human worked beside Solara, carrying water, fixing walls, and even mending the old roof so rain no longer dripped inside. Lyra was happier than ever. She clung to the human's side, bragging to other children in the village. "See? I told you he would stay, he's strong, and he protects us. she declared proudly, her violet eyes glowing. Some children laughed, others looked in awe, but none dared to mock her as they once had. The villagers, however, were divided. Some now respected the human for saving them from the raiders. Others whispered that Solara had bewitched him, that her shame was spreading to him. The council grew more restless, angry that their authority had been overshadowed by a single outsider. They plotted quietly, but the people's eyes no longer feared them the same way. One evening, the humans sat outside with Lyra while Solara prepared a meal. The child leaned against him, her tiny voice soft. "Will you stay forever?" she asked. He hesitated, looking at her earnest eyes. "I will stay as long as your mother wants me," he answered gently. Lyra frowned, shaking her head. "No, not just as long as she wants. You should stay because you want to. We need you, I need you." The words pierced his heart. This little girl, once so desperate, now spoke with certainty that he belonged. And the truth was clear to him. He did want to stay. That night, after Lyra had gone to bed, Solara and the human sat together by the fire. Her silver hair caught the glow, her eyes shimmering with both fear and hope. "You've given Lyra something I never could," she whispered. "A father's presence, safety, joy. She has begun to dream again." The human turned his gaze to her, his voice steady. "She gave me something too, Solara. She reminded me of what I had forgotten, what it means to belong." Solara's hands trembled in her lap. Her heart longed to speak more, to ask the question that burned inside, but her fear still lingered. It was Lyra who gave the final push. The next morning, in front of the villagers, Lyra clutched the human's hand and shouted, "If you're single, will you marry my mom?" The marketplace fell silent, every eye turning. Solara gasped, rushing forward. "Lyra," she scolded, but her daughter only stood taller. "She loves him, he loves her. Why should they hide it?" The crowd buzzed with whispers, some mocking, some curious, some approving. Solara's face burned with shame, her heart racing wildly. But before she could pull her daughter away, the human knelt on one knee. He looked up at Solara, his voice calm but full of strength. "I came here as a stranger, unwanted, mistrusted. But I found something I never expected. Family. If you'll have me, Solara, I will be more than a protector. I will be yours, and I will be hers." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Solara's eyes filled with tears as her hands covered her mouth. Her heart screamed with fear of judgment, but louder than fear was the truth inside her chest. She stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I will have you." Lyra cried out in joy, throwing her arms around both of them. The villagers stared, some in shock, others in awe. The council tried to step forward, but the people themselves blocked their path. For the first time, the village stood not with fear, but with respect for Solara and the human who had defended them all. That night, the three of them sat together by the fire. Solara leaned against the human's shoulder, her daughter curled in his lap. For the first time in years, her heart felt light, free from chains of shame. She was no longer just a widow, no longer an outcast. She was a mother, a woman, and now, part of a family that no whisper could destroy. The human held them both close, his voice soft but firm. "You are not alone anymore, neither of you." And Solara knew he was right. The stars shone bright above the quiet village. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and judgment yet to come. But together, they had found something stronger than fear. Love. And in the end, it was not tradition, not power, not whispers that defined them. It was the choice of a child's plea, the courage of a mother's heart, and the promise of a human who refused to walk away. A family had been found, against all odds, and nothing in the galaxy could take that away.